In 1977, somewhere in Canada, a single company was filling 1 million bottles of pop a day. This wasn't Coke or Pepsi. It was a little outfit out of London, Ontario, started by a handful of friends who had an idea nobody in the soda business thought would work. And it was beating the giants. The brand was outselling Orange Crush and Hires Root Beer. A hockey legend was fronting its TV ads, and every kid in the country knew exactly which flavor they were grabbing first. So how does a company selling 1 million bottles a day in stubby glass bottles you returned for cash completely vanish from store shelves by 1983? How does a brand this loved just die? Because the exact thing that made the Pop Shoppe a phenomenon is the exact same thing that killed it, and almost nobody saw it coming. Let's get into it. Picture Canada in 1969. If you wanted pop, you basically had two options. You paid full price at the grocery store for a 6-pack of one flavor, or you didn't buy it. That was it. There was no mixing, no bulk deal, no choosing. You took what the shelf gave you. Then in May of 1969, a small group of friends in London, Ontario, opened something completely different. The name most people attach to the company is a man named Gary Shaw, and the idea was almost too simple to believe. Cut out the middleman entirely. Instead of trucking pop to supermarkets and letting them take their cut, the Pop Shoppe bottled it themselves and sold it straight to you out of their own depots at roughly half the supermarket price. Here's how it worked. And this is the part that turned it into a ritual. You'd walk in carrying an empty red crate. You'd drop off your empties and collect your deposit back. And then you'd walk the floor. 24 slots in that crate. 26 flavors lined up on the wall. So you didn't buy a case of cola. You built your own case. Black cherry for you. Cream soda for your sister. Lime Ricky because the name sounded fancy. Grape because grape. For a kid, this wasn't grocery shopping. This was the single best decision you got to make all week. And if you grew up anywhere in this country in the 70s, you know exactly the scene. Mom or dad pulls into the depot after the real shopping is done. You and your siblings get turned loose on the stacks of red crates. There's some negotiation. Usually a flat, pick 2 each, and then 20 minutes of genuine agony over whether the 4th bottle should be orange or pineapple. By the time you got home, half the fun was already over. You'd had your moment, and the company knew it, because the flavors were only half the story. The other half was something the founders may not have even realized they'd built, a quiet little machine humming underneath the whole operation. And it's the reason the money came in faster than anyone expected. The vice president of the company that owns the brand today once described the store layout in a way that says everything. It was built like an IKEA, years before most Canadians had ever heard of IKEA. You came in one door to return your empties, but to get back out, you had to walk the entire maze, past every flavor and every stack of pop in the place. And 9 times out of 10, you left carrying a full crate you hadn't planned on buying. The store wasn't really there to sell you pop. It was there to wear down your willpower, one lap at a time. Then there was the deposit, $3 per crate, which in the early 1970s felt genuinely steep. But that steepness was the whole point. That high deposit meant about 99% of bottles came back. Wash them, refill them, send them back out over and over. So there was almost no packaging waste, no shipping to far-off warehouses, and lower costs than anyone else in the business, which meant they could charge 10 cents a bottle and still make money. Cheaper pop, more flavors, and a built-in reason to come back every single week. It worked almost too well. Within 3 years, the Pop Shop had over 500 outlets across Canada. Sales jumped from $1.2 million in 1973 to $17.1 million in 1976. A jump like that isn't steady growth. It's a company catching fire. And when something catches fire like that, it attracts a very specific kind of attention. The kind that arrives with a checkbook. By 1972, the founders were adding franchises faster than they could keep up. So they sold the company to a Toronto venture capital firm called Venture Tech International. On paper, this is the dream. Small idea, big buyer, national stage. The new owners thought even bigger. Their plan was to expand coast to coast, push across the border, and open bottling plants just about everywhere they could. In 1975, they launched Pop Shops International and opened their first outlets in the United States. By the middle of the decade, the brand was selling in around a dozen American states, from New York to California. Back home, the Pop Shop was now outselling Orange Crush and Hires Root Beer outright. And in 1976, they signed a former Toronto Maple Leafs fan favorite, Eddie Shack, as their spokesman. If you grew up in this era, you can probably still picture those commercials. You might never have tasted a single drop of the pop, but you remember Eddie Shack selling it to you. That was the whole point. A familiar Canadian face, a wink at the camera, and a brand that suddenly felt like part of the family. By 1977, the company offered 26 flavors and was moving 1 million bottles a day. It was so dominant that copycats started popping up across the country. Pick-a-Pop over in Manitoba, Pop House in Saskatchewan, Happy Pop out of Edmonton, all of them chasing the same lightning. When your competitors start cloning your entire business model, you've won. The Pop Shop had won, which is exactly the moment the cracks started to show. Because everything about this machine depended on one fragile assumption, and that assumption was about to break. If you're enjoying this trip back, do me a favor and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next Canadian brand we dig into. Now, here's where it all comes apart. The entire Pop Shop model rested on a single idea, that it was worth making a special trip just for pop, because you couldn't get a deal like this anywhere else. Take that away, and there's no reason to drive to a depot. But through the late 70s and into the 80s, the big supermarket chains kept getting bigger, and they started stacking bargain cases of brand-name soft drinks right by the front door, in cans, with pull tabs you could crack open in the parking lot. There was no deposit to pay, no empties to haul back, no separate trip to make it all. You just grabbed a case off a pallet and kept moving. Suddenly, the thing that made the Pop Shop worth the effort, going out of your way to save a few dollars, barely saved you anything. The grocery store was cheaper now. It carried the brands kids actually saw on TV, and it was already on the way home. Why drive across town to a depot when the deal had quietly moved to the place you were already going? So the foot traffic started to thin, and that clever IKEA-style maze that printed money on the way up. On the way down, it just meant a longer walk to buy nothing. Then Coca-Cola rolled out a Diet Cola, the major brands sharpened their pricing, and the supermarkets quietly improved their own store brand sodas until they tasted perfectly fine. The Pop Shop's edge wasn't just shrinking at this point, it was disappearing altogether. But the killing blow didn't come from the supermarkets. It came from inside the company. Remember Venture Tech, the firm that bought the dream? Their ambition turned out to be the real problem. Leadership genuinely believed they could open 15 new plants a year, keep widening the franchise base, push deeper into the States, and chase joint ventures around the world, all at the same time. It was wildly overambitious, and that debt-heavy push into the United States is widely seen as the beginning of the end. So to claw back those corporate losses, the parent company started marking up the prices it charged its own bottlers and franchisees. The very people running the stores, the ones who made the whole thing work, complained that the markups were crushing them. Now picture the squeeze the brand was in. Supermarkets were undercutting it from the outside, while its own corporate office was bleeding it from the inside. There was nowhere left to turn. In 1981, the Pop Shop pulled out of the United States. By late 1982, the corporate parent had slid into receivership, and within a year, the company stopped trading altogether. The original Pop Shop was finished. And here's the detail that stings. They left behind millions of bottles and empty cases, so many that for years afterward, random little bottlers in the US grabbed the abandoned stock and sold their own pop in Pop Shop bottles. All of it unauthorized, just cashing in on the ghost of a brand. The trademark itself quietly expired in 1993. By then, the Pop Shop wasn't just dead, it had been more or less forgotten. And that's usually where these stories end. But not this one. In 2002, a 33-year-old businessman from Burlington named Brian Alger got curious about the brand he remembered from childhood. He went digging, and he found something he could hardly believe. The trademark had lapsed. Nobody owned the Pop Shop anymore. So he bought it. But there was a problem. The original recipes were long gone. So Alger did something a little obsessive. He went on eBay, bought up old unopened bottles of Pop Shop pop, and had the contents analyzed so he could reverse engineer the exact flavors people remembered. In 2004, the Pop Shop came back, and this time it played a completely different game. Where the original had won by being the cheapest pop in town, the new one was built to be the opposite. A premium craft soda made with cane sugar instead of corn syrup, aimed at people who wanted the good stuff and the memory that came with it. And in 2008, the classic stubby bottle returned because the shape was half the nostalgia. And it worked. By 2009, it was outselling American retro sodas, like Dad's and Stewart's, right here in Canada. Today, the Pop Shop is sold across the country and calls itself Canada's #1 premium craft soda. So, sit with the irony for a second. The brand that died because it couldn't compete on price came back by refusing to compete on price at all. The thing that killed it, being a special trip, is now the entire point of buying it. Because the Pop Shop was never really selling pop. It was selling the feeling of getting to choose, the half hour you spent as a kid, agonizing over which flavors went in the crate. And it turns out you just can't keep a good feeling down. If you had a favorite Pop Shop flavor, drop it in the comments. Black cherry, cream soda, lime Ricky, settle it down there. And if you want more stories about the Canadian brands that defined growing up here, the ones that made it and the ones that didn't, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.